Okay, so now from your guys' perspective, can you see the slide, or do you see the little square with your names or with your faces?
Yeah, we see the square on the right side.
But we can see the picture
Yep.
in the left corner.
Yep.
I made my picture smaller, so I don't have any pictures on my screen. It's just the slide itself.
Okay. All right. Okay, so go ahead and let's start reading.
Belshazzar the king held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. When Belshazzar tasted the wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar, his grandfather, had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the gold vessels that they had taken out of the temple, the house of God, which was in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone.
Okay. Belshazzar is the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar's rule is ended. His son, Nabonidus, came in to become the ruler, but Nabonidus didn't really like hanging around Babylon. So he was off to wherever their summer palace was, and he put his son, Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, in charge of the kingdom. And now here you've got this young guy who is just so full of himself, and he is not paying any attention to any of the, very much like many young people today. Tradition didn't mean anything to him. Propriety didn't mean anything to him. It was absolutely never done that the king would have a wine festival and invite women. You didn't do that, okay? But he didn't care. He was going to have a big to-do, and he was going to invite the women and the men. And of course, you start getting wine and mixed couples together, and there's other things going on. So it was really not a good scene at all. It was not the way a king ever was supposed to act. The other thing was, in that culture, the king did not drink in public. He would have his own private little parties occasionally, but he would never get drunk in public. And yet, this Belshazzar, he didn't care. And his name, Belshazzar, Bel was the name of their main god. And so it was his, he decided it was his job to go ahead and have this great feast and honor all the gods, starting with Bel, the greatest god, and working his way down. And in the process of deciding to honor his god, he decided that the best way to do that would be to put down and rebuke and make a bad move towards the God of the people that were in captivity, which were the Hebrews. He knew that in the temple treasury, in their treasury, were all these goblets of gold and silver vessels, and he decided that he was going to use the gold and silver vessels for this Hebrew god to have his wine festival to promote and glorify his own gods. And from the most important Bel all the way down to, so the gods of gold and silver, then the gods of bronze and iron, even down to the little humble gods of wood and stone, they were going to use the goblets and vessels of the Hebrew God to honor even the smallest of the gods of Babylon. And so how do you think God felt about that?
Not okay.
How do you think? What?
Angry.
He's probably
Angry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, the Bible tells us in numerous places that that God will let things go for a while until the cup of his wrath is full. People will say, I've had it up to here, right? Point to the top of their head, or that's the last straw. I just can't take anymore. Well, this guy is really lifting it up. Okay. All right. And so when it talks about it mentions his father. I put grand in parentheses in the New King James and in the New American Standard. Most of them it'll say his father, but it was actually Nebuchadnezzar was his grandfather. Okay. The other thing was he didn't have any respect for anybody that wasn't one of them. And it didn't matter what his father or grandfather did. He wasn't going to lift up anybody. So he invited a lot of these magicians and things to his festival, but he did not invite Daniel. Okay, so that was a very telling thing. So obviously a lot of this was in your face, God of the Hebrews. Okay, so. Okay, come on. All right, go ahead.
Suddenly, the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the back of the hand that did the writing. Then the king's face grew pale, and his thoughts alarmed him, and his hip joints went slack, and his knees began knocking together. The king called aloud to bring in the conjurers, the Chaldeans, and the diviners. The king spoke and said to the wise men of Babylon, any man who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me shall be clothed with purple and have a necklace of gold around his neck and have authority as third ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the inscription or make known its interpretation to the king. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed. His face grew even paler, and his nobles were perplexed.
Okay. Just sit there and imagine you're having this great big party and everything's going great. And all of a sudden, maybe he stops to lift up a toast and everybody gasps. And he's like, what? And they're just looking like terrified. And he says, and he turns around and he sees a giant hand, no body, just a hand, writing something on the wall. Okay. I mean, this is like, it says that he was terrified. He was terrified. Let me see if I can back that up one. There we go. Yeah, it says he became very pale and his knees started knocking together. Did you ever get so scared that your legs were weak? Have you ever been that scared? Anybody? Okay. I was one time when I had to go to talk to my next door neighbor. I've told you about him. I mean, seriously, he really scared me. I had trouble walking home. But this guy, and I didn't even see a hand on the wall. But so he's seeing this totally supernatural thing happening, and he's terrified. But he figures, well, if you see something you can't understand, that you want to understand it. You want to know what it is, because if you know what it is, then maybe it won't be so scary. Maybe one of his magicians are doing some weird stuff, right? So it says he calls in the conjurers, okay, the people that supposedly could bring up evil spirit, dead spirits, okay? And he calls in the Chaldeans, who were all these really, really smart guys. and the diviners, okay, people that were supposed to be like magicians. And you notice that he did not call any of the Hebrews, okay? This is like his own people, because he's only using his own people, his dad's people and his grandfather's people. Oh, they're passé. We're not doing that anymore. So he says to these so-called wise men of Babylon, anybody who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation will be clothed with purple and have a necklace of gold around his neck and have authority as the third ruler in the kingdom. Okay. Number one, the writing was in Hebrew. They didn't read Hebrew.
That's awesome.
Right. Number two, he did not have authority to make someone the third ruler in the kingdom, which would mean that his father is the first ruler. He's the second ruler, but he's just pretty much ruler in name only. And so he doesn't have authority to do that, but he doesn't care because he thinks he's Mr. Wonderful. So he offers it anyway. Maybe he can give the clothing and the necklace of gold, but that other part, no, he couldn't do that. So all of the king's wise men come in, but they could not read the inscription because it was in Hebrew. So, and they couldn't interpret it because, you know, it was kind of like, remember when King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream and they said, we can't tell you what it means because you won't tell us what it is. Well, it's the same thing with this. Because they can't read it, they can't tell him what it means, you know, what it at all. And so it says that Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and it says his face grew even paler, and he was greatly perplexed. One of the other versions said that his face became something about it became just awful, like he was dying or something. It was really bad. Okay. And so they didn't even hardly recognize his face anymore. He was so pale and he was so scared. He just didn't know what to do because they can't tell him what it means. And obviously, you've got something supernatural happening and you don't know what it is. This cannot be good news. So, what happens next?
The queen entered the banquet hall because of the words of the king and his nobles. The queen spoke and said, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts alarm you or your face be pale. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is a spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of your father, illumination, insight, and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, appointed him chief of the magicians, conjurers, Chaldeans, and diviners. This was because an extraordinary spirit, knowledge, and insight, interpretation of dreams, explanation of enigmas, and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belshazzar. Let Daniel now be summoned, and he will declare the interpretation.
Okay. It says the queen entered the banquet hall. People who study these ancient texts believe that this was the wife of Nebuchadnezzar, who had apparently passed away. Okay. And she has, unlike many of the women, she has the authority to come in and speak to the king, who is her grandson. All right. So she does talk to him very respectfully. She says, "O king, live forever." She says, "Don't let your thoughts alarm you or your face be pale." Now, it would take Nebuchadnezzar's wife, his grandmother, to be able to speak to him that way. But she tells him, okay, calm down, calm down. She said, there is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of your father, in other words, your ancestor, your grandfather, in his days, he had illumination, insight, and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods were found in him. Okay, so she's reminding him that there is a very, very wise man, but that's not one of his guys. So he just didn't want to have anything to do with him. Besides, he's a Hebrew, right? So she says, and King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, she reminds him that he was, by saying your father the king, she's reminding him that everybody knows that Nebuchadnezzar was considered to be the head of gold, the greatest king ever. She said, he appointed him to be chief of all the magicians, all the conjurers, all the Chaldeans, and all the diviners. So you have these people here. Your grandfather had made this man head of all of them because there was an extraordinary spirit of knowledge and insight, of interpretation of dreams, and explanation of enigmas, things that he couldn't, puzzles, and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belshazzar. Okay, so she is using Daniel's Hebrew name, and Daniel in the Hebrew actually means God is my judge. Because remember, it was Daniel who told Nebuchadnezzar that God was going to judge him if he didn't stop his sin. And he didn't stop sinning. His pride led him to live like an animal. Okay. So God definitely did judge him. And that was Daniel's message. God is the judge. The name Belteshazzar actually meant protector of the king's life. So somehow back in the early days when Daniel was brought in, the head of the eunuchs who gave them names somehow saw something in Daniel that thought that he would be a man who would be able to protect the king's life. And in fact, he actually did because of the messages that he gave to Nebuchadnezzar. All right. So she said, why don't you bring Daniel in? Because Daniel is able to declare the interpretation, not only of the words, but what the words and this whole thing with a hand on the wall, he'll be able to tell you what it means. Okay? So, go ahead.
Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, are you that Daniel who is one of the exiles from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? Now I have heard about you that a spirit of the gods is in you, and that illumination, insight, and extraordinary wisdom have been found in you. Just now the wise men and the conjurers were brought in before me, that they might read this inscription and make its interpretation known to me. But they could not declare the interpretation of the message. But I personally have heard about you, that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. Now, if you were able to read the inscription and make its interpretation known to me, you will be clothed with purple and wear a necklace of gold around your neck, and you will have authority as the third ruler in the kingdom.
Okay, so Belshazzar brings Daniel in, and he says, are you that Daniel who is one of the exiles from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? Now remember, what is Belshazzar using in his wine festival in order to show that the god is beneath even their lowest gods? What is he using?
Their golden, silver.
The vessels. the
Okay,
gold.
he's using the gold and silver out of the temple of the god of the Hebrews who came from Judah. All right, because he said this is nothing. This god is nothing. So he put him even under his own gods of wood and stone. Okay, but now here comes Daniel, who has the spirit of that God. Okay, the spirit of the gods is in you. Now he doesn't want to say it's just your God. It's got to be all the other gods, because obviously your God can't do that. But it's all the gods. So he has the spirit of all the gods. All right. He says, so you have that illumination and insight and extraordinary wisdom that has been found in you. So he's scared. He's scared. And he is so scared that he is actually lifting up Daniel to a position not as high as Nebuchadnezzar had him, because he says, now the wise men and conjurers were brought before me and they couldn't read this. He said, but I personally heard about you, that you can give this interpretation and you can solve these. He says, now, if you are able to give the interpretation, have you ever heard if you are able in the Bible before? Does that jump out at you about any situation in the Bible where you might have heard that?
Yeah,
Where?
the beginning of Daniel?
Huh?
Is it in the first half of Daniel, the first couple chapters?
Okay, think New Testament.
Chapter? Daniel?
No, think New Testament. Where in the New Testament has someone ever said, if you are able?
Satan, when Satan was
Okay, so the man with the sick daughter says to Jesus, if you are able, and Jesus says, if, and then he says, I am able. So to say if you are able shows some doubt. All right. And so this man is saying, okay, I heard all about this about you, but if you can really do this, all right, if you can do this, I'm going to give you the purple robe and the chain of gold around your neck. All right. And you can be the third ruler in the kingdom. Well, no, you can't. Actually, when Daniel was working with Nebuchadnezzar, he was number 2. Okay. And now, well, I'll give you purple and gold and you can be number 3. Okay. So I can just imagine Daniel was like, okay, let's just tell him where it is. Okay. So where's my thing? Here we go. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So then Daniel answered and said before the king, keep your gifts for yourself or give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription to the king and make the interpretation known to him. O king, the most high God granted sovereignty, grandeur, glory, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar, your father. Because of the grandeur which he bestowed on him, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language feared and trembled before him. Whomever he wished he'd killed, and whomever he wished he'd spare alive, and whomever he wished he elevated, and whomever he wished he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit came so proud that he behaved arrogantly, he was disposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken away from him. He was also driven away from mankind, and his heart was made like that of beast, and his dwelling place was with the wild donkeys. He was given grass to eat like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he recognized that the Most High God is rule over the realm of mankind, and that he sets over it whomever he wishes.
Okay, so Daniel stands up before the king and he said, keep your gifts for yourself or give them to someone else. In other words, I don't want your stuff. He doesn't want this stuff for a lot of reasons. That stuff doesn't mean anything to him. And besides, he knows that before the next day, it's not going to matter anyway what this king does, because he's going to be gone. All right. He says, I will give you I'll tell you what the inscription says, because obviously it's in Hebrew. He reads Hebrew. And he says, and I will interpret it for you, O king, the Most High God. Now, the king should have known who the Most High God was, because you remember Nebuchadnezzar wrote a letter to the entire world telling them who the Most High God was. He says the Most High God granted sovereignty, grandeur, glory, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar, your father, ancestor, because of the grandeur with he, the Most High God, bestowed on him, Nebuchadnezzar. Because of that, all the peoples and nations and men of every language feared and trembled before Nebuchadnezzar. Whomever Nebuchadnezzar wished, he killed. Whomever he wished, he spared alive. Whoever he wished, he elevated. Whoever he wished, he humbled. Okay. But that ability to do that was given to him by the Most High God. All right. And because of that, the people would be willing to suffer these punishments. Right. He said, but when Nebuchadnezzar's heart was lifted up and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly. Remember that? He was standing on the wall of the city. He said, look what I did. Look at all this wonderful stuff that I did. Okay. When he did that, he was deposed from his royal throne and his glory was taken away from him. Who did that? Who took away the glory from him? It was the Most High God. And he was also driven away from mankind, and his heart was made like an animal, and his dwelling place was with the wild donkeys. He ate grass like cattle, and his body was covered with dew from heaven, until he recognized that the Most High God, all right, was ruler over the realm of mankind, and that he puts in charge whoever he wishes. In other words, Daniel saying to Belshazzar, you do not have the authority to give me a position of number 3, because it is the Most High God who puts people in positions of authority, and he can give it and he can take it away. All right. Because this is the authority of the Most High God, whom, by the way, Belshazzar has already acknowledged that spirit was in Daniel. Okay. So Daniel has the authority to stand up and speak to the king this way. Okay. Okay, hang on. I think we need to go back one. Okay, go ahead and read this one.
Okay. Yet you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this, but you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines have been drinking wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which you do not see, hear, or understand. But the God in whose hand are your life breath and all your ways you have not glorified. Then the hand was sent from him, and this inscription was written out.
Okay, so he tells Belshazzar, he just said that Nebuchadnezzar lost his kingdom for a while because of his pride. And he said, you exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven, and you brought the vessels of his house before you and your nobles and your wives and your concubines. Okay. And you've been drinking wine from them, praising your gods. And he says, and you knew this. You knew what that God had done for your grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar. You knew that. Even though you knew all of this in your heart, you knew it. You still intentionally took the vessels that even your grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, and your father have kept in the treasury untouched. Okay. You took it upon yourself to ridicule this God by taking the things that belong in his temple and using them for your drunken orgy. Okay. And he said, and you have used them to praise all of your own gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, and even wood and stone. Those things don't see, and they don't hear, and they don't understand. But the God in whose hand is your life breath. We need to remember that. God holds your breath. It tells us this in the book of Psalms. God holds your breath in the palm of his hand. It says that he can take the animals and he can stop them from breathing and they disappear, and he can give them breath again and they live again. All right. What does that mean? I don't know if have you ever seen one of those things that said, here is this creature that we thought was extinct, and now all of a sudden somebody finds one. How does that happen if it was extinct? It happens because God created it. And if he decides to bring them to life again, it's a simple thing for him to make them live again, because your breath is in his hands. I want you to remember that whenever someone is suffering from breathing problems, you can claim this promise from God. Lord, give them breath from your hand. Give them breath from your hand, because that's where it comes from. Okay. And he says to Belshazzar, the God in whose hand is your life breath, the one who could stop it at any minute, and all of your ways. You knew from your grandfather that the Most High God is the one who puts people in positions of authority. And you knew that. And because you didn't glorify him, because you ridiculed him by taking his vessels and using them in your drunken debauchery and praising your own gods with them, because you've done this, he has sent his hand and has written this inscription. Okay. Okay. So who's going to do the inscription? Who has that?
Me. Now, this is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, uperin. This is the interpretation of the message. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scale and found deficient. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians.
That's a bad
Can
party.
you read it?
The rest of it, you want me to read? Somebody else had 29 through Tammy.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Tammy.
Okay. Wait. I'm in driving mode again. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Ah,
verse
I
29.
don't- I know, but it took me to driving mode. I can't.
Oh,
Then
okay.
I'll read it.
Go ahead, Mary. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with the purple and put a necklace of gold around his neck and issued a proclamation concerning him that he now has authority as the third ruler in the kingdom.
Okay, so the inscription in Hebrew was Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. And then he gives the interpretation. Mene means that you have been judged. You've been numbered, your kingdom, because you've been judged and numbered, your kingdom is going to have an end. Okay. And it said twice. So if you recall if you recall in the book of when Joseph gives an interpretation of the dream to Pharaoh, he says it's said twice because it's going to happen right now. It's going to happen soon. Okay. So God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. And because it's twice, it's going to happen now. Tekel, you've been weighed on the scales and you have been found deficient. So not only is your kingdom going to end, but you yourself have been weighed on the scales. Now, in that culture, they understood that when somebody died, they would actually take their heart and weigh it to see if it would be heavy, which meant that there was a lot of sin, or light, which meant that their gods would find favor on them, which most of the time it was going to be heavy, right? All right. So when he says you've been weighed and found deficient, it means that God has looked at you and knows all of your sin. Okay. And then the upharsin comes, it comes from the verb pharis. Okay. And it means that your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and Persians. So Pharis has this idea of being divided, but it's in a verb form that means that it has already happened. Okay. Your kingdom has already been divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. Okay. All right, and then let's do the last two verses there. Who has 29 and 30?
Oh, I think, didn't Mary just read that? Yeah, Mary just read it.
29 and 30? Okay. Oh, no, that hasn't been read yet. Then Belshazzar gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a necklace of gold around his neck and issued a proclamation concerning him that he now the third ruler. Okay, and then, so we've got one more slide. Go ahead. Who had that one?
I'll read it. That same
Okay.
night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62.
Okay, so just it says that very night after the big orgy debacle and all of that happened, that very night Belshazzar was slain and Darius the Mede received the kingdom about the age of 62. Okay, so We're going to look at a little bit about how that happened. Okay. All right. Okay, let's go ahead over, because remember, keep in mind that when we're studying Daniel because we want to know that when God gives a prophecy, it's going to be fulfilled just the way that he prophesied it. So we had Jeremiah 50:1-3. Who had that?
That's me.
Okay.
It says, the word that the Lord spoke against Babylon and against the land of the Chaldeans by Jeremiah the prophet, declare among the nations, proclaim, and set up a standard. Proclaim, do not conceal it. Say, Babylon is taken, Bel is shamed. Merodach is broken in pieces. Her idols are humiliated. Her images are broken in pieces. For out of the north a nation comes up against her, which shall make her land desolate, and no one shall dwell therein. They shall move, they shall depart, both man and beast.
Okay. All right. So Jeremiah had prophesied back before they even went into captivity that Babylon was going to be captured, that the gods of Babylon were going to be put to shame. So what was happening when this happens? They were having a wine orgy, lifting up the names of their gods, starting with Bel and with Marduk, which was one of their other chief gods. So as they just, even at the time that they are lifting up and proclaiming these gods, the destruction is already beginning to happen and they don't even know it. Okay. So the image of these gods are going to be put to shame and the idols will be filled with terror. And it says, a nation from the north will attack her and lay waste her land. All right. Now, the last part of that, no one will live in it and men and animals will flee away. That didn't happen right then. Okay. That happened much, much later. Where is Babylon? Where was Babylon?
Iraq.
In Iraq. Right. Right. And so it's right now, it's desolate. Okay. There's nobody living there and no man, no animals. It's just desolate. But that didn't happen until much later. But that first part did. Okay. Just like they said. Okay. So Jeremiah 51:28-29.
Sharon,
Yes.
I have a question.
Okay.
So I know it's Iraq, but do we know like exactly where this palace
Yes.
was in Iraq?
Yes, actually, they do. They actually have excavated where this festival was held, and it was. Hold on, I've got the figures here. Yeah, it was huge. It was like something like 30 feet wide and 175 feet long. It was a huge hall, and yes, they have excavated it. They know exactly where it was. Yeah, not from
That's amazing.
but from extra biblical records, from historical records, all the way back to the days of Babylon. Okay, so let's read Jeremiah 51:28-29.
Prepare against her the nations.
Wait, stop. First read Jeremiah 51:11.
51.
Same person.
11. Okay, just a minute. Make bright the arrows, gather the shields. The Lord hath raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes, for his device is against Babylon to destroy it, because it is the vengeance of the Lord, the vengeance of his temple. Prepare against her nations with kings of the Medes, the captains thereof, and all the rulers thereof, and all the land of his dominion, And the land shall tremble and sorrow, for every purpose of the Lord shall be performed against Babylon, to make the land of Babylon a desolation without an inhabitant.
Okay, so remember, this is before Jeremiah is writing, before they actually go into captivity. And look what he says. He says, sharpen the arrows, take up the shields. The Lord has stirred up the kings of the Medes. So these are the ones that are coming into attack, because his purpose is to destroy Babylon. In other words, the kingdom of Babylon that was the head of gold is not going to be as powerful as it ever was under Nebuchadnezzar, because the Medes are going to come in, okay? And it says, why? Why is this purpose to destroy Babylon? It says, the Lord will take vengeance for his temple. Why? Because Belshazzar was using the implements for the temple of God that were designed to honor the one true God, okay? They were using them for their own wine orgy to honor their own gods. And because of that, it says he will take vengeance for his temple. God will take vengeance for his temple. All right. So, and he goes on to say to prepare the nations, their governments, governors and officials, and all the countries they rule. The land trembles and rises, for the Lord's purpose against Babylon stands. Okay, to lay it waste. Okay, so then let's go ahead with verses with 51, 57, 57, and also 36 and 37. Go ahead, Brad.
You want to read 36 first?
Read 57 first.
Okay. I will make drunk her officials and her wise men, her governors, her commanders, and her warriors. They shall sleep a perpetual sleep and not wake, declares the King, whose name is the Lord of hosts.
Okay, so listen to what that says. Long before they even went into captivity, God says, I will make her officials and wise men drunk, her governors, officers, and warriors as well. They'll sleep forever and not awake. That's exactly what was happening in this wine party that Belshazzar gave. They were all getting drunk, right? And so it's even at the same time that all these officials and governors, all these people that, you know, the people that Belshazzar thought were the most powerful people in the kingdom, okay, the whole time they're getting drunk, the Medes are actually sneaking into the city, and I'll tell you how. Okay, go ahead, Brad, with the other part.
All right, verse 36. Therefore, thus says the Lord, behold, I will plead your cause and take vengeance for you. I will dry up her sea and make her fountain dry. And Babylon shall become a heap of ruins, the haunt of jackals, a horror and a hissing without inhabitant.
Okay, how is God going to do this? He says, I will dry up her sea and make her springs dry. Here's how the Medes, so they had built a huge wall around Babylon. And if you recall, back in the earlier chapter, I think it was chapter 2 or 3, I showed you pictures of Babylon. It had an enormous wall that was very thick, right? So they couldn't break it down. So they felt that the city was impregnable. You couldn't get into it by breaking down the walls. What Darius the Mede did was he stationed men at the north end of the city where the river actually went through the city. It went under the wall. So they had a hole in the wall for the river to go through, and it flowed through the city and came out the other end. He stationed his men at the north end and the south end where the river went through. So he stationed all of his men there. Then he went up above the city to the marsh where the river began, and they proceeded to build a dam of sorts across the river to change the course of the river, to stop it, okay, and make it go down the side of the city instead of through the middle. And he told his soldiers, as soon as you're able to walk through that water, I want you to go into the city through the tunnel that the river goes through, okay? And that's what they did. As soon as they stopped the water and the water stopped flowing in the river, the Medes entered the city through the wall, the holes in the wall where the river went through. And that's how they got through quietly. Nobody heard them coming. They were able to sneak into the city, and they went right into the city. And of course, spies had told them where, all the city buildings were. And they went in and they slaughtered all of the generals and the men of power who were all in this same great hall drunk, right? So it says they will be drunk and they will not awake. They never knew what happened. They never knew what hit them, because the Medes came in and took over the whole city, and Darius the Mede became the next ruler. And of course, Daniel, he didn't want the robe and the chain, because he was like, you know what? This doesn't mean anything because you're not in charge anymore. You're not in charge. So what do we learn from this? What are some insights that you have from what we see happen to Belshazzar and the way that whole thing worked? Any thoughts?
Well, God's definitely in control. He has
Yeah.
the plans put together centuries before.
That's right. That's right.
So he's outside of time. He can see everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he also wants to be honored and for what he's given us. Like, he wants to be acknowledged. Like, instead of
That's
saying,
right.
I did it. It's God who's done it for me, not I did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be honored.
Yeah.
Well, how did Daniel survive? Because he could have been killed too.
Well, God's always had a hedge of protection around Daniel. He's fine. He's fine.
He's
Yeah. And he wasn't worried. So keep in mind, Daniel wasn't worried, because he knew that God was in control, and he knew that he was doing what God told him to do. And he knew that he and his friends always obeyed God. And because they did, God protected Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. An army's not going to bother Daniel. This whippersnapper that was just full of himself and wouldn't have anything to do with Daniel. Daniel didn't care. He just went home, waited out. He wasn't worried. Okay. So anything else?
He had history too, because he was in the lion's den and he survived that.
Not yet.
Oh, not yet.
Not yet.
I went ahead.
No, that's coming, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, but he's had history with God, even all
Yes,
along.
he did. Yes, he did.
Yeah, he knows he's good.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
It's a what?
And he wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid to speak out to the.
It's a bee.
Oh.
And Wyatt decided to land on my foot and walk up my foot. I have no idea. What is it?
What is it
All
with?
the animals are going after you.
Sorry, Sharon. I had a bee walking up my leg.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, I normally don't kill them, but
You're having trouble with the animal kingdom tonight.
I'm not having a good night. Oh God, it's
Is
not.
it still alive?
Come get a bread. Come get it.
It is a lot.
Can I call you to my house?
Where is it?
It's right there after the thing.
B, Dion.
I know.
Okay, so while things are falling apart in Dana Point,
Yes, I thought it was dead.
okay, I want to skip back and start thinking about this again, because we see that the thing that really pushed God over the edge where he says, okay, you guys are done. The Babylonians are done, was the fact that the the thumbing of their nose at the one true God. They knew that those implements came from his temple, and they knew from history what Nebuchadnezzar said about him being the most high God. They knew all of that, and they ignored it and just decided to do whatever they wanted to do. And the result was that they lost their positions of power. Okay. Does that give you any confidence at all about what is happening in our world today?
Yeah, heck yeah. What
Yeah.
little confidence I have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me some of the ways that they're thumbing their nose against the Most High God.
Pick away. Abortion?
Okay.
Nadler said we're no longer a Christian nation.
That's right.
Oh, they did? Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah. Don't you remember Obama saying that?
Yeah.
He said, we are not just a Christian, we are not a Christian nation. We're a nation of many gods.
Taking
Good.
God
I
out of
can't stand that.
schools, taking prayer out of schools.
Yep.
Yeah.
Taking prayer out of schools, yes, yes. But it has to go
Transgender
beyond
thing.
just taking out. It has to go beyond that. It has to go to where they're actually rebuking, making fun of, putting down, just it has to go to a point where they're actually mocking God.
Yeah, but what about like people having babies and they're not saying it's a boy or a girl nowadays?
Yeah.
Exactly.
That is really.
Okay. That really mocks everything that God has established
Yeah.
for the world. Okay. Because the Bible's very clear. He made them male and female.
Yeah.
You can't change that. Well, they're trying. They think they did.
Yeah.
So
XXXY.
crazy.
Yeah, some birth certificates no longer have sex on them. How can you do that? You can't do that. Why is Satan doing that? Why?
And it's also marriages. Like
Oh, yeah, it's arrogance.
Men can marry men and women can marry women, and that's disgrace against God also.
Right.
Created.
Why is Satan doing that? What is the whole purpose of men with men, women with women, people saying, I'm not the gender I was born with, I should change, I should have a sex change operation? Satan's behind all this, behind all those lies. Okay.
Procreation.
Exactly.
And God
DNA.
said two reasons that we're even on earth is to be in relation with him and to procreate. So,
Exactly. So when they say we need to depopulate the earth so that the earth can survive, that is absolutely contrary to everything that God established. He established the earth to be enjoyed by us. Okay. And people are made in the image of God. So if Satan can destroy that image by making a mockery of it, just like he's doing, all right, that is the most insulting thing that he can do to the Most High God, is to make a mockery of what God established. And killing babies. I understand there's a bill in California now that wants to make it okay to kill babies even after they're born alive. I know that one of the states has established that you can kill them for like up to 3 months old, and it's still considered abortion.
I don't think, I can't believe that, because once the baby is alive, it's a human being, and that human being has rights.
Once a baby's heart starts beating, it's alive.
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I thought
Okay.
they were killing them in New York. You birth it
Yep.
and you can kill it. I thought they were doing that.
Yep, yeah, they're taking away any penalty against a baby born alive being allowed to lay there till it dies. Okay? All of these things are absolute mockery of what God has established. So, you know, what do they used to say, hide and watch. Okay, just watch what God's going to do, because this cannot continue. It can't stand. It can't stand. God is going to do something. I don't know what, and I don't know when, but I do know that God is not going to allow this to stand. The cup of his wrath has got to be full to overflowing by now. Okay. The only reason, yeah, the only reason God hasn't done something yet is because, yeah, he's not willing that any should perish. And so I think that, remember, we talked back in, I think it was chapter 2, where we talked about the stone cut out, not with hands, that could very well be a huge revival in the world. I think that needs to happen. I think that needs to happen. And we look at Daniel. Daniel destroyed the government of Babylon, but he didn't destroy Babylon yet. The Medes and the Persians came in, but they didn't destroy the city to do it. They destroyed the government of the city, but they didn't destroy the city. Okay? So that's another thing to keep in mind, that the judgment was on those that governed, not on the city itself. Okay? Because obviously Daniel and other people survived. Okay. All right. So if you want to look into that further, I think you can probably look up the history. Yes, Brad.
I have a question before we move on.
Okay.
So I was remembering from Revelation, when we talk about it refers to Babylon in that, is it like, I mean, it's obviously talking about the same place, but is it kind of the same reference, or is it?
Okay. So it is. Remember when COVID started, I told you that this isn't the last 7 years. It's just a precursor to that. It's kind of like a picture of what's going to happen. So what happened back then to Babylon? All right, the nation of Babylon and the city of Babylon was a picture of what is going to happen in the end of days. That there's going to be a government, one world government, just like there was when Nebuchadnezzar was in charge. Only this time it's not going to be a head of gold. It's going to be it's going to be the Antichrist that's going to be running that. So it's kind of a picture. It's kind of a precursor to what's going to happen in the end. And in the end, a lot of times Babylon refers to this spiritual Babylon. Okay. When there are places where it talks about spiritual Babylon, and we know that it's not just a place, but it's a government. Okay. So when you read about Babylon in the book of Revelation, it wants you to think about what happened to the Babylon of that time. Yeah. Okay. You got that? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. And if not, then you're going to have to think about it and figure it out yourself. Because remember, people, I don't have these answers because I'm smarter or more educated than you. You can find the same answers when you really search. God says you search with all your heart and you will know. You will know. And some of the things that I see now, I look and I find that there's other people that are seeing the same thing. All right. That's happening frequently now. When I see this, I'm thinking, well, this is going to be a great revival. And I hear somebody else saying, when it's talking about that stone, it's the great revival. And I'm like, yowza. because it doesn't come to just one person. It comes to many. And that's happening more and more frequently now than ever before, because God said, I will pour out my spirit and your sons and daughters will prophesy, and your old man will see visions, and your young men will dream dreams. Okay. There's a lot of people now there's a lot of dreams being dreamed and a lot of interpretation of those. And it's, you don't want to be ignoring that. I told you I listened to Give Him 15, that short devotional in the morning. They talk a lot about the dreams and visions that are being had, that are had now and being interpreted now. Okay. And a lot of it has to do with things that are happening in the world. So, ask God to open your eyes and your hearts and your ears to find out what's really, really happening. Because what you hear on TV, on the news, that's not what's really happening. What's really happening is in the spiritual realm. Okay. All right. And that should be very encouraging to you. It should be very encouraging. You should have a lot of joy in listening to the word of God and seeing how he works and remembering here's a whole nation that fell, but didn't bother Daniel, right? Because he was in the palm of God's hand. Okay, any questions, comments?
I just wanted to comment. I remember, like back in the early 1990s, talking to a girlfriend who happened to be a Christian, and I wasn't a Christian at the time, but she used to talk about one world government, and I couldn't see it then, but she used to say, oh, someday we're not going to have cash. We're going to be a cashless society. And I remember talking about it then being a cashless society. And this is what, 20 years later? And I could totally, we're a cashless society. We still have cash, but it's going to be gone within the next probably 10 years or less.
Well, didn't Biden just state that we're going to cashless?
Oh, he did?
He has, just like
Oh my
this
gosh.
week.
Well,
Oh my God.
Talked
What did he-
about
Well, I don't know, what,
Yeah.
something about
But
digital
yeah.
currency. Yeah.
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 This
So,
week.
I mean,
Uh,
so I just feel like things are going to start speeding up. Like,
mm,
you know what I mean? Like, I could never see, I'm like, oh, that'll never happen, and I'm just like, oh my God, it's happening. It's happening. We've got to prepare ourselves.
Sharon?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Sharon? So John Corson, he's a pastor, and he says, okay, so when you're on the freeway and you see these signs, he's coming from up north, right? And you see San Diego, and it's like whatever, hundreds of miles away, and then San Diego, and as you get closer and closer and closer, you guys, he is going to be coming soon. It's so exciting. It's really exciting times. I'm so grateful I was saved. Oh my gosh.
I know.
It's really exciting
It really
times.
is.
Yeah. And just be grateful that you've got eyes to see what's happening and you don't have to be afraid, because we're in the palm of God's hand. You don't have to be afraid about that. Okay?
What I see coming is famine. They're killing these chickens all over the world because supposedly they have the flu. And then the trains have force majeure, or however you say that. So they're not going to give grain to the cattle farmers. And I think that they're attacking our food supply
They
because
are, that's
Bill
the
Gates
issue.
wants us to eat worms.
Yeah,
And-
that's true.
And it's not just happening here in this country.
Yeah.
And
Okay, so
maybe this is part of the punishment for what we've done, because I mean, even though these rulers made it legal to do abortions, it was us that did the abortions. Maybe all of us are going to be punished.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just suggest that, really ponder these things. Ask God to give you more insight into them. And wherever you might have a question about something, remember it tells us in the book of James, if you ask, that you have that wisdom, you'll be given that wisdom. So you just ask, and I'm going to stop the recording now.